Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we are exploring image restoration. Those algorithms that can take a blurry photo and make it sharp or upscale a low-res picture, and suddenly you're seeing all these amazing details you couldn't see before.
It's crazy how much we'd actually depend on these algorithms without realizing it.
Yeah,
Just think about all the photos you see online or the medical images that are used for diagnoses,
yeah,
even satellite imagery, to monitor the environment. Image restoration is a huge part of all that.
it really is. And today we're going to be looking closely at this paper with a really interesting technique for image restoration. It's called Variational Bayes Image Restoration with Compressive Autoencoders.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
Yeah?
But basically, it's a powerful combo of machine learning, specifically this type of neural network called a compressive autoencoder.
A CAE.
Yeah.
So tell me about these CAEs.
Well, they're basically neural networks that are made specifically for image compression. So they take an image, they analyze it, and then learn to represent it in a compressed form, but they get rid of all the extra information that's not necessary and keep all the important features that define the image structure.
So they're not just like, zipping a file. They're actually understanding what the image is all about.
Exactly. It's like if you were trying to describe a painting to someone who's never seen it.
Okay.
You wouldn't list out every single brushstroke, would you?
No.
You'd focus on the composition, the colors, the way it makes you feel, right?
Right.
Well, that's basically what CAEs do. They learn to extract that key info, that essence of an image that lets them reconstruct it later on.
So I've got these CAEs. They're like compressing and understanding these images at this really deep level. How does that then translate to actually restoring a damaged image?
Well, that's where this new algorithm comes in. It's called Variational Bayes Latent Estimation, or VBLE.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, right. And so it analyzes the corrupted image, and then it uses what the CAE already knows to identify these latent variables.
Okay, latent variables, break that down for me. What are they?
It's kind of like a secret code that represents the original clean image, but in the CAE's compressed world. So when a CAE compresses an image, it creates this set of latent variables that hold all the essential details, and VBLE's job is to figure out what those are, even though we're giving it a messed up image.
So it's like it's reversing the compression.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And once it figures out the most likely latent variables, it then uses the CAE's knowledge of how images are structured to fill in the missing pieces or the distorted parts.
So like a digital detective using what it knows about images to fill in a fragmented picture.
That's a great way to think about it. But here's what makes VBLE different, okay? It doesn't just give you one best guess of what the restored image should be.
Okay, yeah.
Instead, it estimates a whole range of possibilities, and that gives us a really valuable understanding of how certain we can be about the restoration.
So it's like saying, here's the restored image, but some parts of it you can trust more than others.
Yeah, exactly. It's like having a confidence level for every single restored pixel, and this uncertainty information is huge for certain applications.
Hmm.
Think about medical imaging, where you need to know how much you can rely on a restored image.
Yeah, makes sense. Or like analyzing data from satellites, right?
Exactly. So how well does this VDLE actually work? Well, the researchers, they put it to the test.
Oh, good.
Yeah, they wanted to see how it performed on some common image restoration tasks, like deblurring, super resolution, and inpainting, which is basically filling in parts of an image that are missing.
And what did they use to test it? Like what images did they use?
They used two really well-known image datasets, FFHQ, which is mostly high-resolution images of faces,
Right.
and then BSD, which stands for Berkeley Segmentation Dataset, which is more diverse natural images.
Okay, so they wanted to make sure it could handle all sorts of different scenes and textures.
Right, and they actually used two different types of CAEs, too.
Why too?
Well, one of them was a simpler design, built for speed and efficiency, and the other was a bit more complex, and it aimed for higher byte rates and potentially better compression. So they wanted to see how the choice of CAE would affect the quality of the restoration.
So they were testing the trade-off between speed and quality.
Exactly. And unsurprisingly, the more complex CAE did give better restorations in certain cases, especially when it came to fine details and things like high-frequency info.
Makes sense, but I imagine that comes with a cost, right? Like it takes more computing power.
Yeah, there's a trade-off there, which is what makes this research so interesting. You know, it shows how important it is to choose the right tool for the job.
Right.
If speed is what you need, then the simpler CAE might be the way to go. But if you need to capture every little detail, then maybe the more complex one's worth the extra effort.
So it's all about finding that sweet spot depending on what you need. All right, so I feel like I'm starting to get a handle on this, but I'm still curious to hear more about those latent variables and how VBLE actually uses them?
Yeah, absolutely. We can definitely dig into that a bit more in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so we're going to dive a bit deeper into these latent variables and how VBLE uses them for image restoration. And honestly, I'm still trying to get my head around this whole concept.
It is a tough one, but hopefully we can break it down a little more.
Yeah.
So remember these latent variables, they're basically that compressed representation of the clean image,
Right.
right? They've got all those key features that the CAE learned during training.
Right, like that secret code to unlock the image.
Exactly. But how does VBLE actually find those latent variables when all we're giving it is a corrupted image?
Right, yeah. That's what I don't get.
Well, this is where things get a little tricky. It uses this technique called variational inference. Imagine you're trying to put together a puzzle, but some of the pieces are missing or messed up.
I can picture that, yeah.
So variational inference is like trying to figure out the most likely way those pieces fit together, even with the missing info. It's about making the best guess you can based on what you have.
So VBLE is looking for that best combination of latent variables that would explain the corrupted image.
Exactly. But it doesn't try to find the exact combination, because that would just be, way too complicated and take forever.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It uses this trick called parameterization. It basically assumes that the probability distribution of those latent variables can be represented by a specific mathematical function.
Okay, so simplifying things a bit by making an educated guess about the shape of the probability distribution.
Precisely. And this is where the researchers got really clever. They chose a family of distributions that looks a lot like the one the CAE uses during its initial training.
Oh, I see. So they're using the CAE's knowledge of images to guide them.
Exactly. That's super important because it keeps that restored image consistent with what the CAE knows makes an image look natural. It's
Right.
like having a guide who knows the lay of the land, even when your map's incomplete.
Right. So the CAE is like, hey, I've seen tons of images, and this is how they usually work. Use that to help you.
Exactly. And this approach has a couple of major advantages. First, it speeds things up. Remember, we're dealing with tons of calculations here. So using this specific distribution family makes those calculations much faster.
So it's not just about quality, but also speed and whether it's practical.
Right. And the second advantage is it gives us that uncertainty info. Remember those confidence levels.
Yeah.
This method gives us that info directly.
Yeah.
So we know how much we can trust each part of the restored image.
That's cool. So it's not just filling in the blanks. It's telling you how much you can rely on those filled in areas. You mentioned earlier that they tested this on different image restoration tasks, right?
Mm.
Can you tell me a bit more about how they set up those experiments? Like what kinds of images did they use?
Yeah, they were really focusing on three common problems: deblurring, super resolution, and inpainting. And to really test VBLE, they used two main image datasets. The first one was FFHQ, which was a lot of high-res images of faces. It was perfect for seeing how well VBLE could handle those super fine details, like subtle facial features.
Faces are hard to get right, so that's a good test.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then the second dataset they used was BSD, which is short for Berkeley Segmentation Dataset. This one had a wider variety of natural images with different scenes and textures and objects. So it helped them see how well VBLE could handle different types of images, different levels of complexity.
Right, like a real-world test.
Exactly. Like how does it handle the randomness of everyday pictures?
So what were the results like? I'm really curious to see how VBLE did with all of this. Okay, so we were talking about those experiments with FFHQ and BSD datasets, testing VBLE on deblurring, super resolution, and inpainting. What did they find out?
Well, VBLE did pretty well, especially when you compare it to other methods that also give you that uncertainty information.
Right, right.
And get this, it even held its own against some of those super efficient state-of-the-art techniques, the ones that are known for being fast, but don't really tell you how much you can trust the restored image.
So it's really about more than just making the image look good. It's about knowing how reliable that restoration is, right?
Exactly. And that's what's exciting about this research. It's not just about pretty pictures. It's about adding that layer of like, okay, I can trust this.
Yeah.
It makes the whole process more robust,
Mm-hmm.
more trustworthy.
It makes me think about all the fields where image accuracy and reliability are like super important.
Absolutely. Think about medical imaging.
Right.
Being able to say, hey, we're this certain about this restored medical image. That could be super helpful for doctors, especially when they're making those tough calls.
Or in forensics.
Exactly.
where you need to be sure about the evidence.
Yeah, having that confidence level in the restored image could be a game changer. And this research opens those doors, you know?
It does. It's amazing to think about how far-reaching this could be. But, I'm still thinking about that question you brought up before about applying this to video.
Yeah, that adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Because suddenly you've got time involved, right? You're not just dealing with one frame, it's a whole sequence.
Right. It's like that puzzle we were talking about, but now the pieces are constantly moving.
Yeah.
And that temporal dimension brings a whole bunch of new challenges.
Yeah.
How does restoring one frame affect the next one?
Right.
What about motion blur that's across multiple frames? And then just the sheer amount of data in a video.
It sounds computationally insane.
It is a big challenge, but the potential is huge. I mean, imagine restoring old films in crystal clear quality, or enhancing surveillance footage so we can actually solve crimes, or even just making live video streams look better in real time.
Wow. Talk about changing things up.
Right. And this research, it gives us the tools to start tackling those challenges. It's not going to be easy, but the payoff is so worth it.
Wow. I can't wait to see what comes next in this field. This whole deep dive has been so insightful. We went from the basics of image restoration all the way to these cutting-edge techniques that are, like, redefining what's possible.
And honestly, we've just scratched the surface. As this research moves forward, I'm sure we'll see even more creative applications pop up.
It feels like we're on the edge of some kind of visual revolution.
I think so too. A revolution that could not only change how we see the world, but actually make our lives better in so many ways.
All right, listeners, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of image restoration. Hopefully, you've learned a little bit about how these algorithms can reveal what was hidden and even restore what was lost or damaged.
Yeah, maybe you've started thinking about what this tech could mean,
Yeah.
What are the possibilities for the future?
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
Catch you on the next one.
This is The Deep Dive, signing off.